Hello and welcome to NARC Live on Wednesday, May the 22nd, 2024. Coming to you live from Norfolk on the east coast of England with Tammy M0TC.
Hello.
And me, David G7URP. Great to see you on tonight's show. And it's a packed show, I must tell you. On tonight's show, we meet Anthony K8ZT, who's here live from Ohio for the first in a series of 4 talks on HF for beginners. We have club news and some fantastic Aurora pictures from you. And we do find out what on earth this is.
Dun, dun, dun.
Yeah, and there's been a few varying things. So anyway, if you didn't get around to mentioning it, we'll try and get to you if you put it online now. Now we have really got a packed program for you, and literally for you. In fact, this is the biggest, most stuff I think we've got to show you for a couple of years, probably in the depths of COVID when we couldn't go out and do everything. So anyway, thank you for all of that. So let's get to it. First, we're going to tell you about our AGM. Well, if you were at the AGM last month, you'll know that we make several awards. And one of the awards is actually your award, because it's the Speaker of the Year. It's the person that you as club members decide it was your favourite speaker, him or her. And last year it was Rob Howard from the Vintage TV and Wireless Company, who gave us a talk just before Christmas, and we actually showed it online as well at Christmas. He's also from, of course, Retro Electro Workshop, that TV series. Well, we wanted to present Rob with the award personally rather than just send it. So we thought we'd have a bit of fun and do it in a style that he'd recognise. Have a look at this. Hello Rob, it's David Palmer from the Radio Club.
Hi David, how are you?
I'm good, how are you?
Very well, thank you.
Good-o. I just wonder if you happen to be around, because I've got something rather old and interesting. I'd like to just pop in and show you if you've got 5 minutes this afternoon.
You're going to come here, I'm here, no worries.
Be about half, 3/4 of an hour, something like that.
Fine, I look forward to seeing you.
All right, cheers Rob.
Cheers,
Thank
bye.
you, bye-bye. So I did that from the middle of Norwich. We actually did it about an hour before that from just outside the castle because we thought that would look really good. But unfortunately he wasn't available then. So when I called back anyway, that's where I did it from. And we made our way to the the Vintage TV and Wireless Company. And this is what happened. Right. So I'm with Rob now of the Vintage TV and Wireless Company.
That's it.
And brought you something here, really old, oldie worldy and radio-y, and we'd love see what you think of it. So it's tucked inside here, it's all
Right.
delicately wrapped in tissue. I just wonder if you can tell us what you make of it. It's really quite old.
It is a tiny little speaker of the year.
Tell everybody what you're seeing here.
I've got a very small microphone on an old bass and it says NARC Speaker of the Year on top of it.
Well, Rob,
Thank you
we're
very
really
much.
pleased to say, well,
You
it's
did
not
get me
just
from
for
it, I
us.
thought, it looks like the bottom of an old
Well, we thought this is why we
amplifier.
thought we'd do it like this. You are
Oh,
our
thank you
Speaker of
so
the Year,
much.
and this
You've
isn't
got
just
probably
voted
about
by
me
a
now,
few of us, but this is the whole club who does
Oh,
voting
wow.
on all of the talks that we give on NARC Live and in person. And of course, you came and gave us a wonderful talk
Thank
before
you.
Christmas. And
Oh,
this,
pleasure.
I have to say, and I don't think I've ever said this before, but in terms of numbers, you were overwhelmingly our favourite Speaker of the Year. So on
Oh,
behalf of
thank
all
you.
the members of NARC, thank you very much for that, and
Oh,
we
thank
hope you
you.
enjoy looking after the trophy for
I
a year.
will, thank you so
Lovely
much.
to-
That's brilliant,
Thank you.
you. Oh, look at that.
You can
Right,
keep
place
that,
on the
or
wall.
you want
You
that
can
back.
keep- yeah,
'cause it's
no, of
such
course.
as you'll appreciate. It's a really precious relic.
It is, yeah.
I could, for extra points, I could ask you to make it work, but I would, maybe not.
Well, don't tempt me. Thank you. No, that's super.
Well,
Keep it on
well
the wall.
done,
No,
Rob,
thank
and
you
you
so
very
much.
much.
No, I'm glad you all enjoyed it, because I had a good night that night.
Looking at all the numbers, clearly everybody enjoyed it.
Brilliant.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed.
So there we are. It was a bit of fun. We thought we'd do it in the sort of style, because he used to have someone on the TV series phone him up, didn't he, and tell him he got something really interesting to have a look at, and we'll send it along. So we thought we'd do it in that style. Anyway, well done again, Rob Howard, who was your Speaker of the Year. Now, bringing us right up to date, last weekend there was a big VHF contest, and our contest group was up and ready and busy at Trimmingham in Norfolk. Got some pictures to show you here. And this is from Phil, G4LPP, who led the team. And he says that all the equipment worked very well and as intended. The weather was mostly excellent and everyone was exhausted afterwards. but happy. And these are the sort of main stats, obviously subject to any adjudication and things. 332 QSOs, 17 countries, 81 UK postcodes. Best DX was 1,616 kilometres away, which was YU7ON from Serbia. And the points per QSO was an average of 329. So the score, if there's no major errors, is going to be something like 706, 110 points. Amazing.
10 million, that is.
That is, isn't it? Is that really going to be? That can't really be that right, can it? But
Well,
anyway,
yeah,
that's what Phil sent me. That seems an awful lot of points. But well done to you both. Firstly, the team that ran it. Well done to all of you. Well done to everybody who went along and had a word and gave them some company over the weekend. I know quite a few visitors came. We went on the Saturday, I think, and took those pictures. And also, of course, well done to you if you supported them and if you worked them and you gave them a point or two. So
I
well
worked
done.
them.
You did. That's a first. I could tell you that. That is a first, ladies and gentlemen. M0TC on the air on a contest. Anyway, well done to all of you for that. Glad the weather was good and a bit better than last time, I think, for you out there. Well done. Now, we're going to come back now, and later on, by the way, we are going to show you those wonderful pictures of, as you know, of the aurora. But because of that, of course, radio was rubbish the next day. If you think back to, let me think, it was the Friday the 10th of May, and it was a terrible thing. So the Saturday the 11th, we were due to have our regular monthly sked with Koblenz, but it was pretty much wiped out. So we're going to have a take two, and that's this Saturday. Here's a slide, I think, to show you. This Saturday, it's the usual time, place, 10 a.m, 7.123 megahertz, and a local talk-in on 145250. And hopefully the signals will be with us better this time for take two. Now, I mentioned it last time we were here 2 weeks ago, and of course it's still not that far away now. It's Radioactive, which is on the 1st and 2nd of June. It's a big event, mainly hinged around National Field Day, which is a CW contest, and also 6-metre SSB station, so anybody can get involved with that. But as well as that, lots of other things involved. In fact, Tammy has put this programme, we've sort of cut this out a little bit to try and show you on TV. But if you would like one of these programmes, if you haven't got one yet, if you're a NARC member, they were sent to everybody on our newsletter mailing list, and also printed 30 or 40 out and gave away all of them at the club last time when we met, at the school. So if you'd like, this is a brief overview anyway of our programme, and you can see the sorts of things that are involved. There's also lots of special offers for things that you might want to order. We've got a lovely 20% discount on some Kanga kits that weekend, a unique exclusive discount for us just for that. So lots of things, you can order them all, and hopefully we'll get them in time for Radioactive. But the deadline is next Wednesday. It has to be the deadline because I've got to place lots of orders first thing on a Thursday, which I've got to get here for the Friday. So if you're interested in any of those, if you didn't already get a one of these forms attached to your newsletter, then drop me an email to the usual address, radio@dcpmicro.com, and I will send you one of these weekend guides / booking forms. Lots of details there. I won't bother talking through everything there, but it's a wonderful, and thank you all to all of you as well who supported it with lots of other things. You can see there as well, we've got a weather and propagation forecast of the stations. We've got how we make NARC live. So you'll visit this studio where we're talking to you from now, tinkering with the DX Commander antenna. We've got a lovely talk by Jim Bacon's brother on using QRP and the QCX kit, and of course a wonderful project to make a 2-metre Slim Jim antenna with Steve G0KYA, and that's just £5 for a complete kit, and he'll show you, talk to you about it first, and then show you in the workshop how you can make one either there or at home. Lots and lots of other things as well. You can see the programme there, so don't forget to download one or send me an email, because we will need them all by next Wednesday night. Now, next Wednesday night, though, I don't normally talk about it in this part of the programme, but it's a very important time. It's something we had to postpone. It's the forum. It's what we call our members' forum. That doesn't sound very interesting maybe in itself, but it's a particular time that we do this once a year after the AGM for you to tell the newly formed committee what you would like to see from your club. Lots of ideas we want from you. What do we do well? What don't we do enough of? Do you want to go on some visits? Do you want to visit to Hamfest? Whatever you want us to do. Do you want us to keep doing these online talks, or do you want to just go back to in-person meetings? All of those sort of things and lots more we would love to discuss with you, our members. Now, for the first time ever, I think, we're going to try and do this from the school, both at CNS School, for people who can visit in person. I hope you'll be there. But if you can't do that, and we realise many of you live quite a way away, you'll be able to do it online. So we're going to try and sort of simulcast, as it used to be called, both coming from there and online. You'll be able to watch it in exactly the same way as you're watching us now tonight on the same two platforms, internet willing. And we will hope you'll be as much a part of the evening as the people that are there. You'll be able to ask questions in the usual way and everything, and we'll talk about them and debate them and discuss them between us. So really important, next Wednesday at CNS. Now, some members' news for you. And firstly, from Andy M0NKR. This week, Andy says he'll be over the pond. He went to the Dayton Hamfest, but he's still over there and he's working as W0NKR in Colorado, where Laura and he are visiting an old club member, Johnny, WA5JM. He plans to be QRV from several state parks over the next 5 days as they're travelling around in an RV. Equipment will probably be a Yaesu FT710 running 100 watts with a dipole, or his QRP setup, the ICOM 705 and Wolf Rivers coil SOTA antenna system. And we've got some pictures from there, and also there was a picture, I think, of from the hotel working, which was W4 for Ohio. So there we are. So try and work Andy if you can. Now, a message from Ian G0YAP talking about the Mid-Suffolk Light Railway, which is in Mendlesham, so it's just out of Norfolk. But of course, we love to carry news about this. It's also called the Midi, by the way. You may have heard that if you're into railways. Now, next Sunday and Bank Holiday Monday, Andy 2A0DIQ, Ian G0OZS, Kathy M0DFL, Martin M0HVW and Ian G0YAP will be at the Mid-Suffolk Light Railway near Mendlesham in Suffolk for their 1940s event weekend. They'll have a stand with some radio gear, both modern and vintage, and will be operating a special event station, GB0SLR. Now, Ian wonders, apart from the fact they'd love to see visitors and work you on the air, they wonders if there's anybody from NARC who would love to go and help them either operate the special event station or help talk to visitors about what amateur radio is all about, either on either or both of the days. If you can do that, you can either just go along, or if you want to get in touch directly with Ian, drop me an email to the usual address and I will put you both in touch with each other. That's this coming Sunday and Monday, which is a bank holiday weekend on the Midi. Can't do it, unfortunately. We'll be somewhere else, but I would love to do that. A great place, the Midi as well, Mid-Suffolk. Now, a few weeks ago, in fact the 10th and 11th of May, Gordon G3PXT activated Horsted Mill from from Saturday 10 a.m. on the Saturday till the Sunday, operating from their car park. And these are a couple of pictures. I went to see Gordon on the Sunday along with Kevin, and despite rather grim HF conditions, because remember this was straight after those wonderful auroras, which were wonderful to look at, and we'll see them in a minute, but not very good for radio. But he worked lots. I think he had 70 odd stations he worked, at least when we saw him there. So well done to Gordon for running that special event. Now, those Aurora pictures, I just put a mention in the newsletter, and because a couple of people had sent me them and said, would you be interested? And of course I just added it to the newsletter thinking it would be nice to hear from you about see your Aurora pictures. And we were so surprised to get so many. In fact, so many so that we don't put our guest back too much tonight, who's waiting for us in the States now, we've limited it to 2 best pictures. So where you've sent us more than 2, I'm sorry, but you'll understand we couldn't make this a whole evening event. So we've picked what we think is the best 2. Tammy picked them actually, and we're going to share them with you all now. No, it's not your fault, but I hope you'll understand that we haven't shown every single picture that we were sent. So let's have a look, and they're all in no particular order. In fact, I think they're pretty much in the order we received them.
Yeah.
So this is Steve G3EVA.
Yeah.
2 of his pictures. What I thought was stunning was the bands that you see, and a reminder that although this is on a camera, I know for many of you you'll have gone to bed and not seen it, but although you can normally see these on a camera in the UK, what was stunning in this time, wasn't it, Tammy, is that you could see it with the naked eye, much of this, and I've never seen it personally, as much.
Not in this country, no.
No, so let's have a look at the next one. This is from Richard, G4CDN, look at that. I mean, it almost looks like it's been photoshopped and things, but I mean, it's just stunning, isn't it?
This one's lovely as well. The contrast, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know what sort of cameras they were using. Some people said they just used their phones. Tammy and I, as it happens, were on our way to Norfolk for a meeting the next day. So we did see this but we'll show you our picture later. That was just with a phone, but stunning. Stunning. That must be a proper camera, that full camera.
Yeah.
That was Andy, G0 OPR. A couple of pictures from him, and look at this next one here. Absolutely stunning.
Amazing. Just sort of like
For this country.
bursting out the sky, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, you and I have been on a cruise to go and see these Northern Lights up in Norway, specifically to see them. But I have to say, this was getting close, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Next up, Robert G4T UK over his radio station. Look at that.
Amazing picture, isn't it?
I guess for any of you who didn't see it and you just went to bed, you're probably going to feel pretty sick about this. There is talk about them coming back in about a week's time. Just hope it doesn't spoil radio conditions radioactive. That's second picture from Robert there. Look at that. Pictures, the colours there. This is from David, 2E0 DVS over his antennas, over his QTH. And another one, look at that. This is from Jonathan, G4IVV. Just stunning. I mean, you see it with your eyes, but then the camera picks it out even more, doesn't it?
All the different colours.
Now this is Keith G0 GFQ station, and Tracy 2E0 CEY kindly sent this. Look at that. Fantastic picture. That was, of course, Wayborn as well.
Yeah.
Where he is. And next one, this is from Andy, M0NKR, and he did put a note, I know, on his that this is just with a regular iPhone.
So it's quite a bit more inland, isn't it?
Yeah.
So.
Yes, absolutely, yeah. Brandon, Suffolk,
Yeah.
I think he is.
This one as well. More traditional greeny colour, isn't it? That
Yeah.
one?
But it was just unbelievable. Apologies to those of you who didn't see it, though, because I feel I'm kind of turning the knife a little bit. And this was Bob, G6PWS. Some of you know Bob's just had an operation on his leg, and he's out of hospital, and he managed to send these to us earlier today. So wonderful. Thank you very much for sending us those, Bob. I'm glad you're out and doing well. And this is from an old friend of mine from my BBC Radio Cambridgeshire days, Nick, G0OQK, and I saw this on the BBC Club website, and I just had to ask him, could we use it? And I know he has a professional camera and everything else, he's a keen photographer, but it's still a stunning picture. And then finally, your own, Tammy.
Mine, yeah.
Which is, again, I think, and that's on Wayborn Beach, and that is just, isn't it, a straight iPhone picture?
Yep.
No photoshopping or anything like that. That's straight as it looked.
Yep.
I mean, all right, the colours are a little bit more vivid, aren't they, to the eyes, but nevertheless.
Yeah.
I love the fact you got both in there. It kind of brings context to it.
Yeah.
So well done, Tammy. And well done to all of you. Thank you very much indeed for everybody who sent us some pictures. You know, it was lovely to get so much post in a way, if you know what I mean, for something like this. So we haven't had something like that for a couple of years, probably quite so much here. Steve, G0KY, has just written on BATC and said the active region that caused the aurora will rotate back into view on the sun from May the 27th. I wouldn't be surprised if we get a repeat. And May the 27th, that's just a few days. That's 5 days away, isn't it? Just a few days before radioactive. So I think the contest guys will
Monday,
be praying it doesn't give us much of that. But Monday, yeah. So have a look out on those skies. I'm
Get
sure it'll be on the news.
camera
and
ready.
things. Yeah, and maybe stay up a little bit later than you planned to see them there, because that really is good. But then you can do wonderful things with a normal camera, can't you?
You can get quite a lot of alerts on different apps as well. There's a couple of good apps.
Yeah.
Space Weather and Aurora Watch UK are quite good ones.
Yes, they're very good, aren't they?
Yeah.
But to see it yourself or to take your own pictures, so wonderful. And thank you again for sharing them. That's enough of me talking for a little while. I'll grab a drink while I let Tammy tell you about Little People this week.
Okay, well, just this is. I just thought this was appropriate because we were talking about the weather.
Oh,
so
yes.
another phenomenon is a rainbow, obviously. Do you know what it is?
What's it made of? Oh, plates.
Plates.
That is brilliant. I love their ingenuity. The way they make things out of just regular everyday objects. Miniature-calendar.com, as we always say, a new picture every day. And Tammy picks one out for us. That's really good. Yeah, as you say, very appropriate for that.
Yeah.
Somewhere over the rainbow. Wonderful. Okay, so just going to ask you, to remind you really that we'll be meeting here again in 2 weeks' time, so please keep those pictures coming in, not necessarily of the Aurora, you've probably sent those now, although there might be some more by then, I guess, that which we'd love to see again. Anything you're doing, really, it's lovely to share it with our fellow club members. By the way, I would just mention here, I hadn't planned to say this, but it's lovely that I got a couple of emails in particular from members who joined NARC over the last few years, during the pandemic, but have never actually been to a meeting because they live so far away, but they're coming to Radioactive. There's 2 people at least coming to Radioactive to meet NARC members for the first time. I got an email from that today, so that's wonderful as well. So great opportunity to meet people there. So do keep us in touch. radio@dcpmicro.com. Here comes the email address there. Everything to do with the club. I'm happy to take those, but of course also to do with NARC Live. Just love to see your news. Now let's go to that competition that I set 2 weeks ago when we asked you, what on earth is this? We had quite a few entries. Anybody online?
Bob says he's not sure if he sent you his or not. Let me have a quick look. No,
I don't think
we'll start with that. So Bob G6PWS says, not sure if I sent you my what on earth it is it. So my idea is what does that say? Brooch?
A brooch, yeah.
Brooch used in medical operations.
Okay, thank you, Bob. Oh yes, I can see it up here. Right, now Stuart G7KBF says the item is a drill saw bit or a serrated drill bit.
Colin M7OPB says the new what on earth is a hole cut and drill, sometimes called a drill saw.
John G8VPE, at first glance it looks to me like a brooch for piercing odd-shaped holes, commonly used to cut a square hole from a round pilot hole.
Bruce G4KZT, I reckon this week's what on earth is a side cut and drill bit, useful for enlarging holes in walls.
John 2E0TWQ says, what on earth is this? I believe this could be a drill bit for possibly a CNC router. Also, John, thanks very much for sending us pictures of the other drills and mills, but I hope you appreciate we just didn't have time to include it in tonight's show, but thanks for sending them.
Nev M0NFY, I think this week's is a reamer, a tool for making irregular shaped holes.
Andy W0/M0NKR says, my guess is a security key. Yeah, I can. Do you know what? I remember Ford coming out with a key looked like that. Do you remember that? When it first came out, it looked really strange for cars.
Yeah.
Get that?
Warwick Barnes says it's a brooch for making a square hole.
Martin G7UGB, I think this week's what on earth is a saw drill. You drill a hole and then you can move it left or right and it cuts as it goes. I have a set, but don't find them particularly good as they can wander off quite easily.
Nick M0HGU, looks like one of those drills used to drill oval, square or other shaped holes. Used to have one somewhere, now lost after several house moves.
I know the feeling. And Mike GAEY says, is it a security or safe key or something to make your eyes water? He says, yeah, I get that bit. We won't dwell on that. But it was.
It was. Well, we've actually got a little video of it. So let's go to the video.
And this is from Steve G3EVA. I hadn't seen this video before. That's really good.
Have you not?
No, I didn't watch it when it came in. Otherwise, it feels on my phone. Wow, that's really good. Very effective. Probably worth emptying the bottle first.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Steve, for sending that mystery object, which most of you, I think, got right pretty much.
Yeah.
So let's see how you can do. We'll meet again in 2 weeks. In between now and then, see if you can tell us what on earth is this, or what on earth is this for? If you don't know a special name for it. Leave it there for a little while. We know, don't we? Did you know already?
Yeah,
Did you really?
I've seen one before,
didn't.
yeah.
Okay, fascinating. For the engineers amongst you, you might be able to work out what you could use it for. Send your answers to radio@dcpmicro.com by 3 o'clock at the latest Wednesday week, and we'll read them out to you. All right, almost there. We're sorry, apologies to Anthony, who's been waiting for us in the States now. We're just going to quickly tell you what's happening at the club this week before we go over to him. So on Saturday at 10 o'clock, it's May Koblenz Sked Take 2 on the usual 7.123 megahertz. That's for May. Sunday at 7 o'clock, the GB Torres News. on GB3MB. On Monday night at 7:30, also on GB3MB, the Monday Night Net, and at 8 o'clock, the 80 metre CW Net on 3.543 megahertz. And then next Wednesday, May the 29th, that very important members forum, it's both at CNS and online from 7:30. So please, no excuses for not being there. We'd love to see you at one of those places, so you can tell us what you like from your club for the next year. And of course, do send us your stories, your pictures, and also your mystery objects for What on Earth Is This? And don't forget, of course, we have this card as well, which we're very happy to send to anybody who might be cheered by receiving that card. I actually have here as well, I forgot to show that. This is one of those radioactive leaflets as well, which you can print out. So, thank you very much. Now on to our main event. As you'll seen from the newsletter and the publicity in advance, Anthony K8ZT joins us again to talk to us about HF for beginners. And I guess even for those of us who have been doing this a while, there's still lots to learn, as always. So anyway, it's lovely to welcome to you, Anthony. Good to see you again.
Well, great to be with you this evening.
Can I just ask you as well, do you pronounce it Anthony or Anthony?
It's Anthony.
Anthony.
Unless you're the Dayton Hamvention who created my name tag that said Anthony.
Oh, right, yeah.
Anthoney.
Oh, well, I haven't seen that one. I mean, it is over here, I think it's fair to say in the UK that it's not universally always Anthony. Even if it's spelt like that, we don't always spell the H. But anyway, I just like to get that right. My dad always taught me to get the name right, because otherwise, from wherever you go from there, it doesn't start us off on the right foot. So you're going to tell us anyway about HF for beginners, aren't you, over the next 4 sessions, I believe?
Yes, we will be. Tonight it will just be me, but Dennis Kidder should be able to join us for the remaining 3 sessions. He's traveling back from the Dayton Hamvention to California, and he just emailed me a few minutes ago to say that he just got in his house minutes ago, and he's exhausted because he's been driving all night and morning. So I will be doing it solo tonight. But the slides are from both myself and Dennis should be joining us for the remaining 3 episodes.
Okay, all right. Well, we look forward to it. Thank you very much again for doing this, Dennis, and Anthony. And as always at home now, if you have any questions or comments to make during the talk, we'll read them to Anthony afterwards. But over to you.
Well, thank you very much. This session originally was part of a Rat Pack series on Beginner's Guide to HF Operations, and we were asked to present it in the UK. So about a year ago, Dennis and I created a UK version of this presentation. Now, one of the things about this is, well, first of all, our contact information, my contact information, my shack, and Dennis's contact information, and his lovely wife Liz is with him in the picture there. Now, the funny thing is, Dennis and I have worked together on presentations for almost 4 years now, and we finally met last Thursday at the Hamvention for the first time in person. So this slideshow has a number of links spread throughout it, and this tiny.cc/UK-BGHF will get you all of the slides in the slideshow. You can also shoot the QR code for this link. Anytime you see this symbol or this font, that means that there's a link you can click on in the slideshow. And the slideshow is one slideshow for all 4 weeks, so don't be overwhelmed by the size of the slideshow if you go to it. There's also been some video recordings of this previously, so if you want to take a look at those, you're welcome to. But basically, we're going to be breaking this down over the 4 weeks into tonight, the HF bands operating and making contacts. Next time around, equipment and antennas. Third time, putting it all together, setting up your shack. And the 4th one is developing your HF personality. We'll dig deeper into what happens once you stay on HF. Each set of chapters are broken down by what Dennis and I would normally be presenting, but I will be presenting everything today. So let's jump right in. Many of us got into ham radio for the lure of talking with hams in faraway and exotic sounding places around the world. And these are some QSLs from my collection. To do this magic directly without wires, satellites, or the internet, using radio, we need HF, high-frequency radio bands with worldwide propagation. What are the amateur HF bands? Well, they are really divided into 3 groups truly HF, and then MF, which is medium frequency, and we're also going to be touching on actually what are sometimes considered low frequency bands, but we're going to lump them together, these adjacent bands. So we're basically going to be talking about mainly 3 to 30 megahertz, the 80 to 10 meter band, and once we add in that MF portion, we're going to get the 1 to 3 megahertz, 160 and 80 meters. They're also known as the shortwave bands. For our purposes, we will combine HF and MF frequency, low frequency, and even one very low frequency band to make a total of 12 bands from 136 kilohertz all the way to 29.7 megahertz. These can be divided into 6 bands that we refer to as the traditional or historic low frequency bands: 160, 80 meters, 40, 20, 15, and 10 meters. There are 3 additional bands that are sometimes referred to as the work bands for the World Administrative Radio Conference. These were made available in the late 80s, early 90s, and they include 30 meters, 17 meters, and 12 meters. Since that initial edition of the work bands, there's been a couple other bands added around the world. Some countries have these, some countries do not, but 60 meters, which is in the US one of the only channelized HF bands. It is a secondary allocation, and VLF and LF bands, the 2200 meters and 630 meter bands. Now the 630 band is only available to full license holders in the UK. For a chart here of the IARU Region 1 band plan, there's a link here. And there's also additional charts and maps and band plans for a number of different places around the world in a rather long presentation I have called Maps and Charts for Amateur Radio. And you can click on this link. As I said, anytime you see a link like that, you can click on it. It'll take you out to that resource, and you'll be able to get to that resource. So this is an example of one of the resources you can get to. There's also a written version of this band plan available on the RSGB site, and you can click on that link to get to that. Now, there are 2 things that basically determine where we can operate on the bands. They are rules and agreements. The rules are the official rules by the administrative organizations such as Ofcom and the IARU regions. There's different allocations and modes based on license level. Some work bands have other restrictions such as lower power, EIRP rules, restricted modes, secondary allocation rules, etc. The second thing, though, are the agreements, sometimes referred to as gentleman agreements, although they apply to all the genders. These are things such as only traditional bands are used for contesting and activities like the RSGB Field Day, so we don't use the work bands in those particular cases. Many so-called 5-band awards from the AWRL and other organizations recognize the 5 primary historic bands of 80, 40, 20, and 15 meters. There are worldwide rules, and the allocations of frequencies, bands, and modes vary from region to region, with the 3 regions being Region 1, which the UK falls under, Region 2, which is the US, North America and South America, and Region 3, which is Asia and the Pacific Islands area. Now you'll notice that there is an example here showing what happens with the 40 meter band. You'll notice in Region 2 the band goes all the way up to 7.3, but in Region 1 and Region 3 the band only goes up to 7.2. This is why you don't want to just blindly answer someone you hear on the radio until you make sure that they are within your license limitations. These rules that we talked about earlier, these these agreements, are suggested band plans as to where to work certain modes like FT8, PSK, SST, RTTY, where beacons are placed in the band, etc. These are usually not dictated by the licensing organization, but are rules that we've agreed as hams to make things operate more smoothly. And I have a whole webpage that has a number of rules for different countries if you're interested in that. This is an example of what's called a considered operator's guide. This is from the AWRL, and of course it has the US slant to it, but there are other guides available for different areas. Here's the RSGB band plan. You can click on this and it'll take you directly out to the band plan, and of course the link is broken. I'll have to fix that. And then this is the link that takes you to all my band and mode presentations. So what we're going to do now is we're going to talk about the bands individually, and we're going to start off with what I'm going to refer to as the atypical HF bands. The thing that's different about these is they are slightly different than that middle of the road general HF band. And the first one we're going to talk about is 10 meters. And because of its high frequency, its characteristics are much more similar to the proximal VHF bands sometimes than the other HF bands. It's also very dependent on high solar activity for worldwide propagation, although you can have sporadic E-skip just as you can on 6 meters. In the U.S., this is the only band that U.S. technician class licenses have voice privileges on, so it makes it important for that aspect of U.S. hams, and if you're trying to work U.S. hams, that might be a good place to look for them. It's the only HF band that typically has FM as a form of modulation. It's the only HF band that typically has repeaters, and because of its proximity to the CB service at 11 meters, it means equipment and antenna products sometimes cross over both ways. So a mobile CB antenna could easily be adjusted to use as a 10-meter mobile antenna. By the way, just a quick announcement, 10 meters is now open worldwide. Remember I said it's very dependent on the sunspot cycle, and we are approaching a sunspot maximum over the next year or two, and that means 10 meters and 12 meters have been very active over the last couple years. They will drop off, so you don't want to miss your chance. I have a whole presentation on 10-meter band, and you can click on that for more information and watch the whole slideshow. Let's look at two other atypical bands, 30 and 60 meters. The thing about these particular bands are they're shared allocations with other non-amateur radio services. So that means that we have to be aware of other services and not interfere with them. The 30-meter band is limited to CW and data with no voice privileges. 60 meters is channelized in most countries, or many countries at least. In the US it is channelized, and there's power limitations on both of these bands, different than the other HF bands. For information on the 60 meter on the RSGB 5 megahertz band, 60 meter band, there's a link here that gives you recommended operating practices that you can go out to and see what each of the channels are used for specifically. It's very important to follow that when you're using 60 meters. 160 meters, 630, and 220 meters are different in the fact that they are very low in frequency compared to the other HF bands, and they are much more similar to the broadcast AM bands. Resident antennas for these bands are very long, much longer than most other HF bands, and this sometimes discourages many potential operators because of the size of the antennas required. 160 meters was fairly recently added to most HF radios, so if you would have bought a radio built in the early 80s, it might not have had 160 meters included, but most current HF radios now have both 106 meters, and most of them also have 6 meters, which is a VHF band. But 630 and 220 are not included in any commercially made HF radio that I'm aware of right now. These were only made available in the U.S. in 2017, and these are the only two HF bands that I have not been on personally. Propagation on these low frequency bands is highly influenced by the D layer. So these are typically bands that are much more effective at night after the D layer deionizes, so the absorption is minimized by the D layer at night. There's also a number of resources I have here talking more about each band. The North Oganaga Radio Amateur Club has a guide to each of the bands. You can click on this and follow that. There's also a video, the Ham HF Bands introduction from Dave Kassler, K8ZT, and Don Keith has an eHam article on scanning different bands. And Ham Radio Concepts has YouTube videos on each of the amateur radio bands. So for a lot more information about particular bands, these are great resources. If Because of the wide range of frequencies and wavelengths, the characteristics of individual bands vary considerably. The typical distance ranges, daylight versus night bands versus seasonal bands, are very important when you're choosing it. And amateur radio operators as a service are extremely lucky. Most radio services are limited to one frequency or one set of frequencies, and they do not have the flexibility that we have as hams, having the multiple bands. That means we can choose a band that is open at the time we want to get on the radio, and choose a band that's likely to be able to make contact to a specific area of the world. So it's very important that we learn the characteristics of the bands to use them effectively. As you will learn, each of the bands has a slightly different personality, somewhat like a group of people, but they also have different moods depending on the time of day, the season of the year, the point in the sunspot cycle, geomagnetic status such as the recent auroras, etc. So even though we can get the basic personalities down, we have to be aware that they have different moods depending on different situations. If we compare HF to VHF contacts, there's quite a bit of difference. Other than a few repeaters on 10 meters, all HF contacts are direct station-to-station simplex without any repeating device. For simple contacts on VHF, it's mostly about line of sight. Can we get from point A to point B, including the curvature of the Earth? On HF, it's more all about propagation. Will the signals be able to pass through the D layer without excessive absorption and then bounce off subsequent layers in the ionosphere, come back to Earth, and be bounced again? So very different modes of propagation on HF versus VHF. Propagation between stations on HF is dependent on absorption and attenuation of signals passing through the D layer, the reflection of signals back to Earth by the ionized F layer, and in some cases, higher frequencies, it can also be reflected back by the E layer. Multiple skips of ionosphere and Earth refraction can provide worldwide propagation. For information, take a great look at this presentation by Carl, K8ZT, on sunspot cycles and in cycle number 25, which is the current cycle we're in. So let's take a little bit further dig into this, and VHF, in my opinion, is a lot like archery, and HF is a lot like fishing. What do I mean by that? With repeaters and simplex channels on VHF, you make sure you have line of sight capability, you aim, and if you have enough power, you'll make the contact. With the wide open bands on HF, it's a lot more like fishing. You have to first choose a band, call CQ, and then hope for a bite. So VHF, UHF can be a lot more automatic, whereas HF can be a lot more sporadic. So here's a little comparison of the two different ones. You can see HF, of course, is going to give us local to worldwide communication, whereas VHF is going to be limited to line of sight unless we bounce it off something like a satellite or the space shuttle or something like that for additional resources. Propagation is based on the band and time of day, whereas on VHF, UHF, the only way to really enhance it greatly is by use of repeaters, although there are some occasional long-range VHF communications based on E-skip, EME, bouncing, and different weather patterns. Repeaters are rare on HF, very common on VHF. Popular modes on HF are single sideband, CW, FT8, and FT4, whereas on VHF, FM dominates with only a small amount of single sideband, FT8, and CW activity. Typical radios are multiband, 160 through 6 meter multi-mode CW single sideband, typically 100 watts, whereas on VHF, many people are limited to handheld or mobile FM only single or dual band radios. There are some multi-mode radios, but they're the exception as opposed to the rule. The modes that are typical on the HF bands include voice, predominantly with single sideband, occasionally a little bit of FM, and 10 meters, of course, limited only to, FM limited only on 10 meters. CW, Morse code, is available on all bands, and other than 10 meters, it's the only HF allocation for technician class licensees in the United States. Digital modes, the traditional modes of RTTY and then later PSK, and the newer modes sometimes referred to as digital sound card modes, including FT8, FT4, and so many, many more. There's also images available on HF. The images, though, are still images produced by slow scan TV. There's no motion video on the HF bands. Now, let's dig a little bit deeper into single sideband. Being the primary mode of voice communication on HF since the 1960s, it's replaced most but not all of the AM activity. One of the things that's very characteristic and sometimes problematic for new operators is that single sideband, if not tuned in exactly, sounds a lot like Donald Duck, and the distorted signals are hard to understand. So it's very important to tune the signal in properly. FM on HF is only allowed on 10 meters. AM is found sparingly, mostly on the higher ends of many bands, especially 75 meters, which is the upper portion of 80-meter band. Digital voice on HF is there, but it's still experimental. And if you're interested in that, take a look at the free DV Rat Pack presentation from November 2nd, 2022. Now, CW, aka Morse code. If you're interested in adding CW to your operating, visit my presentation, Having Fun with Morse Code, if you're not already a CW operator. Digital modes. The most popular digital modes are now FT8 and FT4, and I have a whole presentation on that. So, what are the HF privileges in the UK? This is from the Ofcom licensing chart. It shows each of the frequency bands, and then it shows each of the three licenses: foundation, intermediate, and full license. Now, it's very different in the UK than it is in the US. In the US, we limit based on bands that we give each of our different classifications. In the UK, of course, it is based on power levels that are available at different frequencies. Now, this chart was made up before the recent change. 400 used to be the maximum, now it's a kilowatt. So this chart is a little outdated and I need to redo this chart, so I apologize for that. But you can see that there's allocations on all these bands available for all three of the license classes. Make sure you follow the notes on the side here for more information. Here's another chart that shows the frequencies and the suggested modes that you use on each of those bands at each of the frequency segments. So CW, notice, is suggested at the bottom of each of the bands. Although it could be used on the whole band, you're probably not going to find someone up here at the top of the band using it, so it's best to follow our agreements and operate down here. And there's a link here that will take you out to this chart if you want to make a copy of this. It's available. You can see the data takes place right above CW in most of the bands, and then single sideband is predominant above that. On 10 meters, of course, we then have other modes. We have FM and we have satellites, etc. As far as call signs go, I'm not going to go really through this. I just have this listed here for people who aren't familiar with the UK call sign system, and I know there's always changes taking place, and there's going to be some changes in the licensing structure for the intermediate license, I understand, in the near future. So some of those license styles those call sign styles will be changing. Now, let's talk about operating. We've talked a lot about the bands, but we really haven't talked much about operating yet. So on HF, there's really what I'm going to refer to as a couple different types of contacts. The first one I'm going to refer to as random contacts. One station gets on the air, calls CQ, and people tuning around find them and answer them. Or you could be the person tuning around listening for other people calling CQ. So that's a random contact. And one thing I want to mention about HF that's very different than VHF, UHF, it is not channelized with the exception of 60 meters. So there's no reason it needs to be exactly on the 0.000 or 0.005 portion of the band. It can be continuous throughout the band. So there's not one specific frequency you should be on. I've heard people say sometimes, well, you're not on a right frequency. Well, there is no right frequency on HF. The next type of contacts on HF are what I'm going to refer to as serial contacts. One station is making contact after contact with a series of stations. An example of this might be a DX station calling CQ and answering multiple stations over a period of minutes, hours, or even days. The DX station then works the next station, one by one. Now, with a serial contact, something can happen. Sometimes it gets very crowded, so many DX stations will work split. They will call on one frequency and ask stations to reply on another frequency or set of frequencies where they're listening. It's very important that you find out how a station is operating before you answer them. If they're operating only on one frequency, we often refer to this as simplex. That means they're calling and answering on both the same frequency. But if they're operating split, they're calling on one frequency but listening on other frequencies. So make sure you have your radio adjusted properly, or you will not be able to make a contact, and you will frustrate other operators by interfering with them. Another type of contact is contesting. Now this is, you might say, well, that's sort of like that serial contact we talked a little bit earlier, and it is in some ways, but the thing in contesting is stations are trying to work as many other eligible stations as possible. Often there's point multipliers such as states, zones, countries, etc. There's two main types of operation. Calling CQ over and over again in working stations, basically like our serial that we talked about earlier, aka running. There's another fashion, that's the stations that are listening for the CQing stations. They're tuning around trying to find them, so they're hunting for them, and then they answer the CQs. This is often known as searching and pouncing. Searching and pouncing is often much easier for new operators on HF because they're not calling CQ and having 20 stations replying to them at the same time that they need to sort through. Another type of contact on HF are roundtables. These are on-the-air gatherings of 3 or more operators. It's sort of like a group chatting. And because it's HF, there's no courtesy beep when they let up on their microphone as there might be on a local repeater. So it requires making sure that you let people know when you're stopping transmitting, and so the next person knows when to start. Nets are another form of HF communication. They're very similar to the roundtables, but in the case of a net, there's typically one person that's directing the other stations as to when to talk and when to listen. We'll talk more about these later in future slides. Now, the last type is what I'm going to refer to as pure chance. We already talked about this a little bit later as random contacts. You call CQ and you listen for a reply, or you tune and find someone calling CQ and you respond to them. Now, with the bands being as big as they are, you could call CQ for quite a while. No one might stumble upon you and find you. So we're going to talk about some ways you can increase your odds. The first thing you want to do is you want to learn a little bit about propagation and then check and see what the current solar and geomagnetic conditions are. This will help you choose the band to use. There's also some general rules of thumb that say nighttime bands like 80 and 160 are going to be much better at night, so that's when you want to go there. Daytime bands such as 15, 12, and 10, your chances are much better during the day. So understanding a little about the way propagation works can greatly increase your chances. When I was a ham just starting out, I didn't realize it, and I would spend all day calling on 80 meters and all night calling on 10 meters, and I had it backward. Some other ways to up your odds of making contacts on HF is to use online spotting sites. These are sites that spot other stations around there. They're often referred to as DX clusters or clusters. Another way is getting on the air during periods of high activity. Well, when is there higher activity? Typically on the weekends. Also, certain times of day on specific bands, there's much more activity. There's more activity from September to April in the northern hemisphere than there typically is from May until August. Periods of high solar sunspot activity, such as right now, means that the higher bands, 10 meters and 12 meters, are much more likely to make contacts than during a sunspot lull. Getting on during scheduled events such as nets, special event stations, field days, etc., and during contests, even if you're not interested in competition, can greatly increase your chance of making HF contacts. Some other ways to up your odds: understanding effective calling and answering styles. Knowing the script or structure of a typical contact or QSO. So if you know exactly what's going to happen, it's very easy. So it takes away some of those jitters of a new operator understanding. Listen to some contacts and see what people say, the order they say it in, how they sign off, etc. Understanding timing is very important. If someone's calling CQ, it's very important to understand when you should answer them. Should it be immediately? Should you pause for a second? Should you pause for a long time? And one of the ways you do that is by listening and seeing which stations are effective. Know how to use your radio's features. This is especially important if the station is working split and you need to call on a different frequency than you're listening. So make sure you know how to use your radio's features to do that. Some tips for your first HF contact. Ask a ham friend to be with you there and help you out. Make sure you're within your band, mode, and license allocation before you transmit. Again, just because you hear someone on the radio doesn't mean that you have privileges to operate there and transmit. Make sure your antenna tuner are set for the frequency that you've chosen. One time I accidentally had my switch set to antenna position number 2. I was transmitting on 160 into my 20-meter beam. It wasn't working very well. So make sure you're on the right antenna if you have multiple antennas, and make sure you have everything set properly. Listen, listen, listen. Hear how others are doing it and mimic the best operators. Other tips on single sideband. Choose the right mode based on the band. Now, there's nothing in the rules that says we have to use upper sideband or lower sideband on specific bands, but based on the fact of some original design parameters, which we won't worry about right now, amateur radio uses upper sideband on some frequencies and lower sideband on others. That's not typical of most radio services, but for the most part, from 20 meters and up, we use upper sideband. From 40 meters down to 160, we use lower sideband. Now, there are two main exceptions to this. The first one is on 60 meters, we use upper sideband, even though it's in those lower frequencies. And that's because it's a shared service with other services that are all using upper sideband. And then the other difference would be if you're operating digital, FT8, and your radio does not have a specific digital setting, you want to use upper sideband for that, no matter which band you're on. And another exception is if using radio teletype, you want to use lower sideband no matter which frequency you're on. Here's a great excerpt from a book called Ham Radio for Dummies by Ward Silver and 0AX. And you can click on this link. It takes you out to the accompanying website that you could read information about listening to single sideband. Make sure your filtering is set based on the mode. On single sideband, filters are typically set anywhere from 2.0 to 2.7 kilohertz, so rather wide. On CW, they're often set much narrower. So if you would have your filter set at 0.2 and try and listen to a single sideband signal, you would not be able to understand what they're saying. So it's important to have your filter set properly for each type of mode. Very, very, very important, make sure you stay in the band. What do I mean by stay in the band? Well, you need to make sure that your radio is set properly so your signal does not go outside of the allocations that you're provided. And there's a great article here from QST Magazine. You can click on this link and read it. But I'll give you some general rules. For upper sideband, even though your radio says that you're in the band, remember that it will extend approximately 3 kilohertz above that frequency. So we want to make sure, for example, if the top of the band is 21.450 on 15 meters, we want to stay at least 3 kilohertz below. So you want to make sure your radio setting says 21.447 or lower. That will assure that you're not transmitting above and out of the band. On lower sideband, it's exactly the same, but just the opposite. We want to make sure we're not transmitting outside of the segment. So, for example, in the US, and it's slightly different in the UK, the bottom of the phone band is 7.175. So you'd have to make sure that you stayed at 7.172 to not have your signal extend out of that. On CW, it's best to stay about a half a kilohertz from the band edge. That'll assure that your signal is not splattering over and crossing over. Another thing is very important to make sure that your radio controls are set right. And you can easily cause confusion if you have your RIT or XIT, also called the clarifier on some Yaesu radios. This separates your transmitting and receiving frequency slightly, and if you have that turned on when you don't expect it on, you might not be transmitting exactly where you think you are, or receiving exactly where you think you are. Some tips also include read the fabulous manual that came with your equipment. In addition to the supplied manual, it's really easy nowadays to find written guides and YouTube videos for your specific model of radio to learn about all the controls and settings. If you're talking about a much older radio, there's a great website called BAMA. It has manuals for boat anchors. So it's the Boat Anchor Manual Archive. So if you have a really old radio and you want to go out there and find a manual for it, BAMA is a good place to do that. If you have a currently manufactured radios, here's the manufacturers, and most of the time you can download a copy of your user's manual. And you might say, well, I had the paper version. Well, I like also having the PDF version because for me, it's much easier to use my computer to sort through it for a key word as opposed to having to go through the index or the table of contents to find the portion of the manual I need. This is an example of a great piece of resource I found on the web. This is set up so that you can click on each of these links and go to the specific settings for this particular radio, the Yaesu FT991. These are all the menu settings, and you can click on this and it will get you to the right section of the instructions that you need. And you can find more things like this on my Maps and Charts for Amateur Radio page starting around slide 44. There's a great set of YouTube videos on the ICOM 7300, probably one of the most popular current radios out there. From Ham Radio A to Z YouTubes, they go through all the different operating tips on that. There's a great series of books by Fred Cady, K8ZT, unfortunately now a silent key. He wrote the series of books on the Elecraft radios that go way beyond the manuals and give you a lot more information. There's a great set of YouTubes by NB3N on the Yaesu 991. Kenwood 590 has a YouTube playlist out there that's really good. And there's some really good books being produced by Andrew Barron, ZL2 Delta Whiskey. And you can click on this link. He usually puts out new books each time a new radio comes out. Some other tips for making contacts on the HF bands. Speak clearly. Have a local ham help you set your audio levels and settings on your radio by making an on-air contact with them. That'll help to make sure that your radio is sounding the way you hope it is on the other end of the contacts. Use standard ITU NATO phonetics and or carefully chosen alternatives for your call and name as necessary. If you use funny or atypical phonetics, it may be very problematic if the person is not an English language speaker predominantly, and they might get confused by the phonetics. I watched the station in California spend over 3 minutes trying to make a contact with a Fox Yankee station in South America, and he was using atypical phonetics and confusing the French-speaking operator. When he got to me, with my 5 watts only, I was able to make my contact quick and easily by using the standard phonetics. No typical Q signs for both on CW and single sideband, and some of the ham jargon, but don't overuse it. Understand the typical parts of the QSO. How do people start off a QSO? How do they continue the QSO? And how do they end the QSO? Signal reports. There are 2 general rules for signal reports. If it's a non-contest contact, try and give as accurate a S unit reading as possible. So for example, on single sideband, I might say that you're 5, which is your readability, the highest number, and 7, which is your signal strength based on my S meter. But in contesting, there is only one set of reports to give. That's 5NN on CW, 599, using cut numbers, or 59 on single sideband. In contest, don't bother with accuracy. Speed and consistency are more important for signal reports. There's also a little AWRL link here with a little article on making your first HF contact. And I have a whole slideshow presentation called How to Make That QSO, Get in the Rhythm, Know the Rhyme, and Dance the Dance. And this talks about timing. It talks about when to put your call in, how to give your call sign, how fast to speak, how fast to send CW, etc., etc. So take a look at this slideshow, and there's also a video link in that slideshow that you can watch a presentation of it. Now, you've set everything up. You're calling CQ, answering other CQs, using all the tips that I've given you above, but no one's answering, or you're getting very few replies or contacts. So I put together a presentation on checking your station's signal to make sure it's getting out and it's readable. You can go to the slideshow on successful operating, and you can also watch a video. And I talk here about using other operators at the other end, using the reverse beacon network, using DX clusters, using online software-defined radios to listen to your own signal. So if you're not sure why you're not getting out really good, this is a great presentation to take a look at. There are a number of both passive and active methods for hams to let other hams know about on-air activity. So they vary by operating modes and method. There's DX clusters and spotting, the reverse beacon network, and PSK reporter. Let's jump into each of these. For CW, the reverse beacon network is great. There's a set of stations around the world monitoring multiple bands and listening for CW signals. They then decode these CW signals using a piece of software called CW Skimmer. The information is gathered up, aggregated, and sent to one site, the reverse beacon network site, where they post the information. So if I simply transmit my call sign along with CQ, or I send a test in my call sign, the reverse beacon network will pick me up and post that information to the central reverse beacon network site. I can quickly see where my station is being heard around the world and how strong it is. On FT8, a great tool is PSK Reporter. Many of you probably have seen this before, but if you've not, you can simply put your call sign in. You can put in a time frame, click go, and it'll show you all the stations that were decoding your FT8 signals around the world. It shows how long ago it was, and you can also see the signal strength. These are not stations you worked. These are stations that were decoding your signal. There may or may not have been an operator at the radio. It might just be sitting there, but it's very easy to have your information sent back if you're using FT8, FT4 by clicking one little box in the FT8 settings in WSJTX. But it's a great tool. Even if you do not operate FT8, FT4, if you know someone in your neighborhood that does, you can see where they're being heard. Or you can put it in a DX station and find out which bands they're transmitting on around the world. There are also some CW spots that show up here, but it's predominantly FT8 and FT4. Now, single sideband unfortunately does not work with either of those two automated systems. There's no single sideband skimmer out there, and there's no reverse beacon network. So what happens, these are predominantly made by people posting the information or by software. So if I'm contesting and I'm using N1MM, I can have all the single sideband stations I work automatically posted as I work each one by choosing a setting in the software. But again, I still have to decode it myself by listening to the station. So there is no automated single sideband posting system, but the DX cluster does have a number of single sideband posted in it. If you're interested in a lot more information on propagation, DX, spotting, clusters, etc., I have a whole webpage that you can go to with information on propagation and spotting. Now, one of my number one pieces of advice to new HF operators is get on during HF contest. Why should you do that? Well, some people like it for the competition, but I'm going to tell you, even if you're not competitive, get on during contest because A, there's a high activity level on most traditional bands where the contesting is taking place. It's a great opportunity to hone your operating skills by copying unfamiliar call signs, in pileups, etc. You can work new grids, new states, new countries, etc., sometimes even a new DXCC entity. And the best part is the other stations want to work you as your points for them. So getting on during a contest, even if you're not interested in competition, greatly increases your chances of making contacts. Even technician license classes in the United States can join in the fun with the 10-meter band. Other hams appreciate the contacts you provide. Make sure you know the exchange, though. The deal is if you want the contact, you need to be able to give them the exchange that they're expecting. And I have information on finding out the exchange that you need. It might be something as simple as your name, your location, your grid square, the power you're running, or it might be something like the CQ zone you're in, etc. So make sure you know what the exchange is for each contest. It's different for different contests. Contests also allow you to evaluate your station's performance. You can experience and learn about propagation effects with lots of stations on lots of bands over 48 hours. It's your choice. You can invest just a few minutes, or you can go full-time BIC, which means butt in the chair, to operate the full contest and maybe even send in a log. or not. It's your choice. If you're new to contesting and you don't know much about contesting, I have a presentation, Introduction to Amateur Radio Contesting, that goes into all the details about wooden exchanges, how to make the contacts, etc. There's also a video you can watch of me doing the presentation. If you happen to be an ARRL member, there's a class that I wrote for the ARRL, Introduction to Amateur Radio Contesting, in the Learning Center. There's a number of different HF activities: contesting, award chasing, DXing, nets, POTA, parks on the air, SOTA, summits on the air, IOTA, islands on the air, portable operations and mobile operations, and then there's people that are more interested in construction and building and designing antennas, homebrewing radios and kits, emergency communication, traffic handling, special modes, classic or boat anchor radio collecting, etc. So there's a lot of things you can do, and we'll be talking more about this next week on the actual how-tos of getting on the air. I mentioned nets before. Nets are a very convenient way of having a lot of people get together at one time, but they can also be used for a number of purposes, such as emergency nets, chatting nets, DXCC gathering nets, worked all state nets, etc. They can be directed or undirected. And for information on nets that you can listen to, there's a number of resources I have here. You can click on these and find nets and net times and frequencies around the world. I mentioned roundtables earlier, and we've already covered that, so I'm not going to go into that. There's a number of awards available for HF operation: worked all states, worked all continents, DXCC for working 100 countries, worked all zones. These are CQ zones. WPX is worked all prefixes. It just happens this weekend is the WPX contest. It's the CW version, and stations get multipliers for working different prefixes. That'll be taking place this Saturday and Sunday. Here's a list of awards and of awards you can try for on all of these lists here. If you're just getting started, you might find some interesting information in these other presentations I've done on buying amateur radio transceiver, the one I already mentioned about successful operating, and the ham radio life beyond repeaters, talking about things you can do as starting out beyond just getting on the local repeater. So that's the end of week 1, and I will now take questions and answers. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pop back to the first slide so you can shoot that QR code if you'd like, or get the shortcut for all of the resources in this presentation.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Anthony. I think my next thing was going to be to ask you what you were covering next time. So you've already explained what that will be. Yes, next week we'll be talking about equipment and antennas. Lovely. Okay, well, it's actually 2 weeks' time, just to not confuse. I'm not splitting hairs, but just to so that everybody realises. So this will be in a fortnight's time. So if you have any questions or anything that you want to ask Anthony about HF in particular, but I guess anything else, he's been with us several times before, then please do it now on either BATC or Facebook. Anthony, I was going to say firstly that for many beginners, certainly in this country, they get the foundation license, and I'm guessing for most of them, the first operation they do and the first thing they go out and buy is going to be on 2 meters, a simple handy, maybe something like that. And I guess what you're doing here is showing them that there is a lot more out there than just VHF, because certainly in the UK, we can often find VHF is quite quiet. Same thing here in the United States. It's very quiet. So yes, getting started with HF is one thing that's really good. And I want to give those foundation licensees some encouragement about HF. You might think because of your power limitations that you're not going to be successful. Power is not as important on HF as it is on VHF and UHF. As a matter of fact, I'm a QRP, that means low power operator. I operate 5 watts all the time, even though I can operate up to a kilowatt with my license. And I have now just passed the 115,000 contact mark. Now that's over quite a bit of time, but you can do great things with low power too, so don't be discouraged by the lower power levels of the lower license levels. No, it's a very good point. As you say, you can do so much more. You can work the world with 10 watts. In fact, some people in this hobby prefer to work QRP, as it's called, and can see what they can do on that. And also, the antenna, it doesn't have to be, or at least in my opinion, not quite as complex.
Correct. By far and away. You can have very simple antennas for HF and do great things.
Yeah, and you mentioned, by the way, earlier, Carl K9LA. He did actually give us a presentation maybe a couple of months ago now on propagation cycle 25. So, yeah, that really helped to know what you can do. And of course, sometimes though there are some dead times, not totally as dead as it was after that aurora, but you know, that's just like VHF though. After all, that can also be difficult. Thank you very much for doing a UK version of of your talk. I don't know if we've got any questions or anything yet for us from you. I guess it's because this is more of a learning thing. While we wait for any other questions or that anybody has, can I just ask you about Dayton? Because you're the first person I've actually seen to talk to who's been to Dayton. So what were your highlights?
Well, first of all, I want to mention I just saw Carl actually at Dayton. So my highlight of Dayton is the people that I get to meet. Every year I get to see people that I only read about the rest of the year or I hear about. So just the people part is my favorite part of Dayton. Now, I can tell you some good news and some bad news. If you weren't at Dayton this year, you didn't miss any new introductions of brand new radios from any of the major manufacturers, with the exception of one major manufacturer, and that's Flex. And we're talking about the $5,000 and up range, so I'm not going to consider that really of importance to me. The one other exception was on the other end of the spectrum, Hans from QRP Labs introduced the new QMX Plus, which is 160 through 6 meter QRP 5-watt radio. It's available as a kit for $125. You can also get an enclosure for a few more dollars, and if you wanted assembled from Hans, you're looking at about $230 total. But a fabulous CW and data kit with the promise of single sideband in a future firmware update. So that was one of the highlights as far as equipment goes. Now, I was also lucky this year. I was honored by getting an award from the Dayton Hamvention. I received the Dayton Hamvention Special Achievement Award this year, so I got to go to a banquet along with Ward Silver that I just mentioned, N0AX. He was the winner for the technical achievement this year, so that was another feature. The weather was pretty good. We had rain on the first day, but then we had heat, about 30 degrees centigrade and up for the remaining 2 days, so not being used to that. But again, if you ever get a chance to go to Dayton, the absolute best part is the people you'll meet from not just the U.S., but from around the world. I had a chance to talk to people from all different locations, and it was just great fun. Now, I know that it's too late to go this year, but I have a snippet. If you go to contestuniversity.com, again, that's contestuniversity.com, they live streamed one whole track of the 4-track sessions, about 8 hours that you can watch at the recordings that are posted on YouTube. And you can watch me for 2 presentations. I did one presentation on myth busting in amateur radio, and I did another one on QRP and low power contesting. And again, if you go to Contest University's YouTube page, you can find that. You can also go to Contest University's website and find all of the slideshow presentations that were given this year and for the previous 10 years. So there's a lot of material in that respect.
Lovely. Okay, well, thank you. And I've just also worked out we don't have quite as many people watching as normal. And I remember now earlier today someone said this is a contest night in the UK. This is what we call, I mean, this is contest nearly every night, as you know. But the 80 metre CC Championship, Club Championship, it's tonight between 8 and 9:30. So that's just the way it works. So maybe that's one of the reasons. But of course, we're recording this, and some people will be watching this in the next day or so. So once again, thank you. I have got actually a message from someone who I know is still over in the States. Actually, one of our members, Andy M0NKR. He says ICOM showed boards of something that's coming called the X60, which will be more than likely be a new flagship radio or replacement upgrade to the 7610. Have you got any thoughts on that?
Yes, they had a plexiglass cover, and under it they had about a half a dozen circuit boards. Well, I know a little secret because I was in the room in the morning before the group came in on Sunday morning. They were also shuffling those boards in and out over the weekend, so there's actually many more than the half a dozen you saw because they were putting different ones in each day. But they'll be announcing this new radio, which will be their 60th anniversary radio, at the Japanese convention later this summer. The code name is the X60, so if you do a search for ICOM X60, you can find information on that on the website. And again, next week we'll be talking a lot about different radios that are available. One of the things I picked up was a Yaesu 710. There are some really fabulous radios for under £1,000 that are available when there are different promotions going on, and even under normal circumstances, for under £1,500, you can get a fabulous HF radio.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And I think that QMX sounds nice as well. We've had Hans Summers on NARC Live, so we'll look out for that. I have just had one, not really a question, so no questions for you, but don't take that as bad. That means that people have understood what you've said. Martin G6WNN, though, is watching on BATC and says, that was a very interesting presentation. Thank you. I've been away from amateur radio since the late 1980s, so it was a great refresher for all the possibilities open to me. So there we are, not just for beginners, but for people who just want to bring themselves up to date, I guess.
Well, very good.
So once again, Anthony, thank you ever so much for joining us this evening. We'll look forward to seeing you again in 2 weeks' time. Here on NARC Live for part 2, and we'll be looking at radios and all those other things that you talked about as well. So once again, thanks very much. And
hopefully Dennis will be able to join us. So again, thank you very much. 73?
73 to you, and we look forward to meeting Dennis as well. Thank you very much. Thanks, Anthony. There we are. That's almost it. Just let's have a look, as you usually do, look at what's happening at the club this week at 10 o'clock on this Saturday. It's the Cablence Sked for May, take 2, on 7.123 megahertz and on 145.250 local talking. On Sunday at 7 o'clock, the GB2RS News on GB3MB repeater. Also on GB3MB at 7:30. On Monday night, it's the Monday Night Net. And at 8 o'clock, the 80 meter CW net on 3.543 megahertz. Then next Wednesday, remember, a week tonight, May the 29th, very important night for us, the people that hopefully run your club, members forum, where we really ask you for feedback, the things you like, you don't like, what you'd like to see us do, ideas for talks, workshops, or everything really to do with Norfolk Amateur Radio Club. Whether you can join us online or whether you can join us at CNS, we look forward to seeing you then. And also, of course, don't forget to keep sending us your stories and pictures, and also mystery objects as well. I'm getting down the list to get from the earlier ones you sent me earlier this year. So if you find some unusual gadget, maybe do let us know. That's almost it. Thank you from Tammy and myself. At this time, we normally just say goodbye. But sadly, we're going to say goodbye in a different way, because during this, I had a message sent by one of you, Tim M1MIT, who gave us some very, very sad news that one of our members has passed away just this morning. And we didn't want to leave tonight without letting you know this very sad news. I'm afraid that Michael 2E0SZP is silent key, and we'll leave you with a picture of Michael with all our thoughts and prayers for his family, and we'll bring you details of his funeral in due course. From Tammy and me, good night.